Hi, I'm Eran, and today we're going to take a look at a new design for New York City's public spaces. The idea is being proposed by ODA Architecture's founding principal, Eran Chen, and we're going to be talking to Chen to understand how this idea came to be, and also to a developer and land use expert from Silverstein Development, Brian Collins, to understand how plausible putting this idea into practice would be. So first, let's begin by taking a look at ODA's plan.
I'm Eran Chen of ODA. I'd like to share a new concept for the Flower District in New York. This case study demonstrates how we can expand the public realm, embrace density, and ultimately improve the life in our neighborhoods.
While cities are expanding all over the world and super tall structures dominate our skyline, there's an increasing importance to reactivate our urban core and improving life at the street level. We looked at the historical Flower District, located in the crossroad of iconic city landmarks and public parks in the heart of Manhattan, where community and commerce once flourished. This neighborhood, once filled with hundreds of flowers vendors, have been struggling for the past few decades. As traffic and cars have come to overpower pedestrians, it has become very hard to maintain a sustainable social and economic urban fabric. While typical streets are not enough to sustain a new density, existing city blocks have hidden courtyards that are privately owned and are underutilized. We propose a new city regulation that will encourage developers to bestow interior courtyards and create new connections to the street in exchange for an increase of floor area and height. As a result, the privately owned area will open up to the public. Now imagine a typical block, where over time, these spaces are being created and passageways are connecting them to the street. The ground floor surrounding these newly formed courtyards can now be meticulously programmed, replacing urban decay with markets, small businesses, coffee shops, diversified housing, hospitality, urban farming, and public art, and will expand the public realm to create a true cultural experience. Web of environmental, social, and economical sustainability will take root over time and expand in the Flower District and beyond. We look forward to a New York that is more inviting to explore, with green nooks of secret experiences that expands the imagination and show the power of reinvention.
Can you take us through the creation of this idea and how the idea began and your thought process?
There was a shift in my head, I would say about 4 to 5 years ago, from single buildings to cluster of buildings to neighborhoods. And we've done the Bushwick Denizen project, as you know, in Brooklyn, where we tried to kind of start blurring the line between communal and public, and what's private and what's public, and creating those pops by the virtue of inner courtyards that are open to the public, and try to program them in a way that would attract people together and interact in a more kind of equitable way. And I'm actually walking through the Flower District almost on a daily basis on my way back and forth from home. And it's a neighborhood that I've seen changing through the years. And there's something super romantic about, if you look at the history of the Flower District, that it's not just a place where flowers were kind of sold but it was a really true mixed neighborhood with hospitality and office and residential. It was pedestrianly dominated. And it was an interplay of all of these urban elements that we love around the idea of flowers.
What do you think of this concept?
I think it's a really interesting concept because that space mid-block between buildings is often underutilized or almost forgotten.
Like, would you incorporate it into a project of yours?
So we are actually working with Eran on a project in Astoria called Innovation Queens, where we have taken some of these concepts and implement them into the plan. So while the streets are activated with retail, as they normally would be, we've created a corridor that runs parallel to 35th Avenue, which would have its own shops.
And the idea is basically sort of streamed around giving 25% of the private land back as community property in different scales, from a park to courtyards to gathering spaces and alleyways. Frankly, I think this narrative resonated with not only city planning, but also with the community, or maybe I would say first with the community.
So I think there's a lot of pros to it. The challenge will be that in the current built environment, it's very difficult to implement this, right? So this is really new development. You can do enough massing. One building doing this probably doesn't make sense. But if you can do several buildings or a whole block front together, then it starts to make, I think, a lot of sense.
Who would be taking space back there?
You know, retail is evolving. So it's as much about services as it is about goods, as it is about food and beverage. So who goes back there? You know, I could see national retailers or larger retailers having frontage both on the street and in this courtyard area. Oftentimes it'll be more the destination retail. You know, if I'm taking my pet to the pet spa, I know exactly where it is, right? And it doesn't need to be street facing.
Knowing New York City development as you do, you know, can you imagine a world where a block of different owners are trying to work together to introduce this?
I think it can certainly happen. It will take the first developer to have the foresight and the initiative to start it, but we're all looking for opportunities to enhance our customers' experience, whether that customer is a residential tenant or a commercial tenant or the public. And if my neighbor has taken advantage of this and has created a nice, you know, the start of a block, why wouldn't I, as the next door neighbor, try to take advantage of that?
How would you, from a structural standpoint, actually create these spaces on the ground level?
The idea is that by changing zoning regulations, that in very general terms, create incentives to building owners, as well as retail owners, as well as new developers, to give back the back portion of their ground floor. And we all know that the retail value, as you go deeper and deeper into the back, becomes less and less valuable. So if we create an incentive system that basically incentivize people to give back that area to the city, in turn of floor area at the top, we're then exchanging less valuable and arguably, you know, space that is really unused today into the most valuable place in the building at the top. That would drive people to do that.
Now, again, it's almost always going to be about new development, right? Because the FAR bonus that Eran is thinking of, or maybe it's not a bonus, maybe it's just moving FAR from the ground floor up high, right? Which can add value to the FAR. That really only makes sense in a new build situation. One could imagine, but a substantial rehab of an existing building, but it would have to be a very major rehab.
What do you think would be the turning point and would really motivate owners, developers to actually jump on this, you know, on this concept?
Ultimately, it's about driving rents. But
Okay.
but it's not necessarily driving rents directly. It's driving rents by creating a more, more desirable environment and activities that people are looking for.
How would the city have to possibly work with developers if this concept was really going to gain traction around the city?
The city really has to think about how do we manage, how do we enforce, how do we make sure that this isn't just a method of moving FAR and creating FAR, they're really creating desirable spaces. So I would think the city would want to make sure that the public is in fact benefiting from it. It's not just being created for the sake of creating it, but how does the public use it? A pop space in front of an office building that's just a big open courtyard isn't really helpful to the public. There's no place to sit, there's no food and beverage, there's no activity there. It just becomes a space and they move the FAR up above. I think that's not what Eran's going for. Eran's looking for that public benefit, and it would be important for the city to ensure that that happens.
And I feel that we can get many people excited about this. I mean, when you start unfolding this idea and you say to developers, imagine that there's a parcel for sale or existing building for sale, in the Flower District on 29th Street or whatever, but you could do this with that parcel. And we could create around that a center that is mixed use, that has some residential and hospitality and maybe small office spaces. How much more attractive that would be as a proposition. And you can take that FAR from the bottom and put it at the top. It changes the matrix. It changes the potential, both financial and long-term sort of usage and value. And I think this could really revolutionize the Excel sheet matrix of how developers in the city look at value. For many years I've done this. I still do it for my clients. You look at the Excel sheets. What's the value of the ground floor? Okay, the retail is worth X amount of dollars per square foot. We should put this formula on its head.